All right. Hello, everyone. Today I have such a special treat for you. I get to have a chat with Crystal Paine. Most of you probably know her as the Money Saving Mom on Instagram, but she also is an author of several wonderful books, two of which are some of my personal favorites, The Love-Centered Parenting, and this most recent one, The Time-Saving Mom. And today we get to chat with her about kind of what that looks like in a really practical way. And so, hi, Crystal. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
So, Crystal, you share a lot on your Instagram about what your daily life looks like and what time management looks like for you. You're a mom of six kids.
Yes.
Six kids.
3 bigs, 3 littles.
Yeah, 3 bigs, 3 littles, and that's a big spread. And you've done quite a variety of things in terms of homeschool, private school, public school with them. You've got a couple that are in school right now, one graduating. And you've got some littles that you're homeschooling preschool with. And it's just, okay, first of all, let me fangirl for a second. I just love following you because it's just so inspirational to me. I'm a mom of 2 littles and I'm a business owner as well. And sometimes it can get overwhelming. Sometimes it feels very overwhelming. And so how you show up so authentically, I feel like really is just so encouraging and inspiring. And I love how you just point to Jesus, just so much. And one thing that I just would love to hear from you about, and have you share, is what it really looks like in a practical way when we're going through really challenging seasons. Like you share in your book how right as you were starting to write this book, you said yes to long-term fostering your son David, who you ended up adopting, and then you also ended up with a surprise pregnancy, which was a blessing but a surprise, right? And how do these principles really play out in a challenging season when it's tempting to be overwhelmed?
Yeah. And, it's so interesting because I was writing this book thinking that I was going to just have 4 children and then ended up with 6 children. And so, how God just allowed me to be my own case study. And honestly, there was a point when I found out that I was pregnant, just feeling like, I don't think that I can have morning, noon, and night sickness and have 2 toddlers and 3 teenagers and run a business and write a book. I don't feel like that is I'm at capacity. And yet I'd already signed this contract and I thought, okay, then I get to actually walk this out. Do these principles actually work? And so the first principle that I talk about in the book is prayer. And, it's not just starting my day with, dear Jesus, please, help me today, but really, what does it look like to lean into Jesus? What does it look like to practically ask him to give you what you need to go through each day? And so for me, that is starting my day, oftentimes on the treadmill, and just praying over the details of my day. So praying over the interviews that I have, the meetings that I have, with my work, articles I need to write, and then maybe a conversation that I need to have with a child, or I'm meeting a friend, or I'm feeling really heavy-hearted about something, or one of my kids is really struggling with something, or I'm struggling with patience or in my marriage, just praying over those things and really releasing them to the Lord. And so starting from that posture of prayer, that posture that says, I can't do this in my own strength, but in Christ, I can do all things. And so for me, there is just such a peace, and there is just so much that I feel so much stronger as a person when I start from that space of my weakness, of acknowledging I can't do this in my own strength. I can't do this well. I don't have what it takes, but God, I know that you do. And so in those difficult seasons, and when I was writing this book and when I was feeling stretched very thin, just starting each day with that prayer of, God, you're going to have to give me what I need for today. I don't know how I'm going to find time to write. I don't know how I'm going to find time to do the things that you've called me to do, but I'm just trusting you. And he was so faithful. I mean, I wrote this book pretty much in 5 and 15-minute little segments because that's what I had. But it's like offering up my 5 loaves and my 3 fish to God and saying, here's what I have. Take it and use it and give me what I need to do what you've called me to do. And so starting from that. And then also the second principle that I talk about is prioritizing. And I have what I call the 6x2 priority system that I outline in the book. And it's that I have 6 priorities, but I only focus on 2 per day. And that's something that's really helpful when you have seasons that are difficult, that you're not trying to do all the things. And so focusing on 2 per day allows me to be fully present in those areas, allows me to just really lean into that. And also when I'm there, when I'm having that time with that child, or an at-home date with my husband, or meeting with a friend, or focusing on my health, or investing in the business, whatever it is, that I can be fully there instead of feeling like all these other places that I need to be. And so prioritizing has been huge for me. And it also, using the system has allowed me to have so much more breathing room. And so those are 2 kind of foundational things. And then in the book, I also talk about just planning, and how having a plan with lots of breathing room, with planning for the unexpected, has been so helpful to me. And then also prepping, which is not only prepping your space, like prepping what you need for the next day and that sort of thing, but also mentally prepping. And I talk in the book about, the words that we say, the words that we think, how they impact our life so much. And so if we just sit there and are like, I'm in a really difficult season, I can't do anything. Well, one, that's not true, because you're talking, you're sitting, you always can do something. But instead of saying, I can't do, or I'm not able to, or I'm not good at, let's change that to a positive. And so I challenge people to say, what can I do? Instead of just kind of making excuses, or just having that resistance of I can't do anything. And so, like I talked about, writing this book in 5 and 15-minute segments, it's like, that's what I could do. That's what I had available. And so I'm going to do that, instead of being like, well, I got to wait until I have a 2-hour time block, and there's no 2-hour time block. So it's just not going to happen. And I even give some examples of just things that you can do in 1 and 5 minutes, to invest in other people, to make a difference, to invest in your marriage. We sometimes discount the power of small things. And so changing our mindset and prepping our mind and reframing the way that we think also, I think, has a huge impact, especially during difficult seasons.
For sure. I love that. And when you're saying that about like the little things, something that came to mind is one thing that I've noticed in my life. Let me know if you've seen this too, because I'm kind of curious, is that I tend to like inflate how long things take. Right? Like I'll sitting and going like, oh my gosh, there's like dishes piling up. Need to load the dishwasher, thinking it's going to take half an hour, and it takes like 5 minutes. Right? And like sometimes I think it goes along with that mindset you're talking about, like the prepping of like going like, take a breath. How about setting the timer? I have 5 minutes. How much can I get done in 5 minutes, even if I don't finish the task? I think it can be so helpful.
Yes, I'm such a big fan of the timer and of 5 and 15 minutes, like what we can accomplish in that time. And I also think we can kind of get ourselves into a bad position by not recognizing that like little choices have consequences. And so just this morning, someone was asking me, how do you do your laundry so quickly? Because I've talked about, I'll be like, start a little laundry. And they're like, well, it takes me so long because I have to spot treat and all that. And I was thinking, well, how do I? Because I'm not. And then I realized, oh, if something, if I'm taking a outfit off of a child and there is a stain on it, I don't put it in the laundry. I actually go straight to spot treat it. And there's so many different things like that, where it's like, I just have these systems in place that I've just built up over the years, where you just kind of do these things automatically. When the mail comes in the door, you just throw out all the things that just put it in the recycling right away. You don't need to have a pile of it. Just put it in the recycling. Like starting those things where you just automatically do it so that it doesn't pile up and then become this thing that feels overwhelming. It's like rinse your dish whenever instead of just sticking it in the sink, rinse it and stick it in the dishwasher. Little things like that to just keep up on things can make such a big difference.
That's so true. I love that. Talking about your system, can you like, how did you come up with it? Right? Like, it sounds like it's been something you've kind of built over the years, but like, was there like a trigger that kind of like got you kind of going like, I really need to establish like these systems? Does that make sense?
Yes. Well, so I've always been the kind of person where I am kind of one of those people that I can see solutions. So I can look at a big picture thing and I can come up with solutions for most things. And so I know that not everyone has that sort of mindset. And sometimes it can be a bad thing, because I wish sometimes that I could just focus on one area, and instead I'm like, no, I got to look at the big picture and figure out, this problem solve the whole entire thing. But it can also be a gift. And so for me, problem solving and coming up with solutions is something that I've just always been really wired and gifted in. And so as I will hit something where it's like, this isn't working, most of the time I can just stop and step back and be like, okay, well, what else can we try? Instead of just being like, that doesn't work at all. And so, yes, it is years of learning these things. In the book, I talk about how I was hitting this wall of just feeling like there was so much swirling around in my head. And I was just constantly feeling like I had so much to do. This was years ago. And my husband was like, well, why don't you use Google Calendar? Why couldn't you just brain dump all of that into Google Calendar? And I am not a techie person. And so I was like, I don't do techie stuff. Like, I don't have apps. Someone on an interview actually the other day asked me, so what apps do you use that help you with your time management? And I gave them this blank stare, and I had to pull out my phone, and I looked through my phone and I was like, I don't really think I have any apps. I mean, Google Calendar. And so I am just not an app techie kind of person, even though I have an online business. And so I was like, that's not going to work for me. And he's like, well, just try. And so I wanted to prove him wrong, because I'm kind of stubborn. And so I said, I'm going to do it for 3 weeks. It made such a difference in my life. And so it's really challenged me to think of, how can I get stuff out of my brain? What systems can I put in place to get things out of my brain, to automate things, to streamline things, so that I'm making it easier? Because I feel like so often we just make things more complicated than they need to be. And then we feel overwhelmed with life, and we're not able to fully show up, when, one at a time, little bit by little bit, we could start developing these things that over time would make such a big difference in our life.
I love that. I think that's so interesting. Like you pointed out, how we tend to make things more overwhelming than they need to be. I wonder, do you have any thoughts about why? Why do we do that?
I think sometimes we just get stuck in a rut. It's like, well, it's what we've always done, or it's what has been modeled to us. We've just seen this is the way that we were raised. And so we just kind of carry that on. Or I think it's very easy to make excuses instead of to take ownership. And so we would rather sit there in our mess and feel overwhelmed and make excuses for why it doesn't work, and to say, what can I do? And maybe it's not going to work perfectly. And maybe it's not going to, end up being a long-term solution, but it's going to at least give us some forward momentum. And I have truly found this with MoneySavingMom.com. I talk a lot about grocery budgets, and I will talk about, our grocery budget, and not in the context of everybody should have this grocery budget, but just sharing our grocery budget. And it's so interesting how people, instead of just being like, oh, that's great, that's inspirational, they will immediately just resist it. And they'll tell me why they couldn't do that, why it won't work for them, why, they live out in the country, they don't have the same stores that I do, they have 3 teenage boys, they, have food allergies. They list all this stuff. And I'm always confused, because I'm like, I didn't say you needed to do this. I didn't say this was for everyone. I didn't say this was a grocery budget you should have. But how we just so often make excuses. We want to go to that place of, if we're kind of feeling challenged, if we're feeling a little bit I should probably, there's some conviction here, I could do better in this area, it will just immediately resist it by making an excuse, instead of saying, well, that won't work for me, but what could I do? What can I do with what I've got where I am? And so I just really challenge myself constantly to not be making those excuses, to say, I can't do that, I'm not that kind of person, that won't work for me. And instead, what can I do with what I have where I am?
I love that. That mindset kind of reminds me of the story, and I think it's, I want to say Chronicles, about the woman with the oil, when she goes to the prophet and she's like, my kids are going to get taken away and made into slaves because of this debt, and I have nothing. And he's like, well, what do you have in your house? Right. And she has this oil, and God miraculously multiplies it so she's able to pay her debt and live. And just that, it's kind of that mindset too. That I don't know, remind me of that story. What can I do? What's in my hand that God has given me, instead of being caught up on what someone else has or what I don't have.
So
I love
good.
that. So have you found like, as you've, well, obviously you just shared that like over the years the system's tweaked. Have there been any seasons of your life where like there's been like a radical shift in how you had to kind of like completely reassess how you do things? Or has it been just little tweaks over the years? Does that make kind of like, one thing that I found, at least in my life, is that sometimes there's like all this constant tweaking, especially when you have kids, right? Every few months they have a new developmental stage and things like that. So there's constant tweaking of how things are working. But then sometimes there's like something humongous that happens that just completely like takes the rug out a little bit, or can. And it can cause like a complete reassessment of like, oh my gosh, what do I do now? Have you had any of those type of like really major turnarounds in how you approach like time management and your priorities and all of that?
For sure. In 2020, we started fostering a little boy. We brought him home from the NICU. And then 4 weeks later, we had our biological daughter, who's now almost 3. And it'd been 10 years since we'd had babies in our house. And so it was this massive shift of, not only it was smack in the middle of COVID, so everything was shut down. My kids were home from school. But also that then we have these 2 newborns. And it was so interesting because it was that season where you probably remember that it was like everybody was starting things online. You know, it's like, we're going to do this series or start a new podcast, or, you know, we're running this challenge, or we're writing this ebook, or, you know, everybody was doing something because they were just home. And so there was all sorts of cool things happening online. And I was sitting at home rocking babies. And I remember like, I couldn't even give myself the brain space to think of anything that I could do, because I was like, I don't have the capacity right now to do anything other than just the real basics. And so business wise, I did not work at all as much that year. It was the first time that I took a maternity leave. Always with my other 3, I just kind of, you know, as soon as I had them, I just got right back to work, because I worked for myself. So I could do that, which I wouldn't recommend, but it was just like, I kind of felt this need to keep, I don't know, feed the beast is what I kind of call it, of like, you know, I need to be hustling and doing all this. And this time around, I just decided I'm going to take a 6-week maternity leave. And sure, I was on Instagram some, but really all of my responsibilities, it just kind of, I didn't do hardly anything but just a few hours of work a day. And it was only stuff that I really loved to do, and only did it when I had the time. And it was such a shift for me of recognizing, oh, like, all these things that I've been spending my time doing that I felt like were so important when it came to running the business actually weren't doing that much, because the 6 weeks, like, the business survived just fine and it didn't really affect the income. And it was like, I'm not as needed as I thought I was. And it was really, really good for me, because it caused me to have this big shift of how I approach my days, instead of very much always being like, okay, the business like that, I've got to prioritize that because that puts food on the table. More being like, okay, in the grand scheme of things, what's going to matter at the end of my life? And I want to wrap my time in my life and my energy around that. And I want to have breathing room in my life. And I want to really be able to just do, you know, invest in people and relationships. And so that was it was a big shift for me in just how I approached my work and my days. I wouldn't say that it, you know, from the outside looking in, a lot of people may not have seen a huge shift, but I could feel it so much in my heart. And since then, when my maternity leave was over, we changed a lot of how the business ran. I delegated more things. I deleted just some things and was like, I don't need to do that anymore. And just kind of slowed down my pace. And since then, it's just been so good, because that's given me space to be able to, we then, you know, like talked about, started fostering David, who he has a lot of special needs. And so I didn't know that God was kind of preparing the way for me to be spending a lot of my life at doctor's offices and therapy clinics, and also just spending time just holding him and loving him and taking care of him. And then also that we were going to be having Micah too. You know, I didn't know these things, but I look back and I see how God was preparing my heart to be able to have the space for that. And so I'm just grateful for that shift. I feel like if I had just had one newborn and taken a maternity leave and COVID, I probably wouldn't have had such a radical shift, because I probably would have been like, well, I can, everybody else is doing all this stuff. I should do something too. What can I start? But because I had two newborns, it was like, it just wasn't a reality. And I think that was so good for me to realize, we don't have to do all the things, and I can celebrate what other people are doing, and I can be excited for them, and I can promote them and support them. But I can also be okay with my just really quiet, simple, slow life right now. And this is a gift, and I'm going to just sit here and receive it instead of feeling like I need to be doing more.
I love that. That's so awesome. Like, yeah, that's slowing down, especially because like the littles, like they grow up so fast. Like it goes so fast. I'm sure you know that now. With
Yes.
the three olders. And yeah, that's amazing. I love that. So I have one last question for you before we kind of like wrap up. And it is, if you had to give like a new mama who kind of thinking about maybe yourself, like when you had your first three set, right? And we're starting a business and hustling, kind of thinking about that, a mama who has a couple youngins, is an entrepreneur, is trying to build a business to ideally make money, right? Like that mama who's looking at all and going like, how do I juggle that? Like being here with my kids and pouring into them, taking care of them, but also building a business to ideally eventually support the family. What would your like number one piece of advice to her be?
Well, I don't know that I have only one piece of advice, but I think I would start with, saying like, stop paying attention to what everybody else is doing and just stay in your own lane, because I feel like that it is so easy when we get online, all the noise and the voices of, I need to be doing this, and I need to be researching this, and I need to be doing this. I mean, I feel this all the time, and I have to kind of just have my blinders on when I go online, and I don't follow that many people, just because I found for me, if I am constantly being bombarded with things that make me feel like I need to be doing more, that's just not a healthy thing for me. And so kind of figuring out, okay, this is what I can realistically do. This is the time that I actually have, and I'm going to focus on what is going to give me the best return on my investment of time during that time. And I'm going to be okay that there's a lot of stuff that I'm not going to do. I was actually just recently meeting with someone who they have a similar business, but there's this kind of light years ahead of where mine is. And just sharing with this person about how I'm okay with being small, and I've selectively chosen to keep our business much smaller and say no to a lot of opportunities and actually quit a lot of things and just focus on a few things, because that gives me breathing room and life and ability to have life outside of the business. And so I think looking back at early on, I worked so hard, burning the candle at both ends. And I think a lot of it had to do with my just a dysfunctional view of God, truthfully, because I was finding my worth in my work. And instead of really understanding how much I was loved by God, I was chasing after the accolades and the approval and the affirmation from other people. And I found that through work and that kind of addiction to busy. And so that then I would just be so busy that I wouldn't have time to recognize kind of that hole in my heart that I was trying to fill with this busyness. And then also I think it was that scarcity mindset of feeling like, if I don't do this, then maybe we're not going to be able to, put food on the table or whatever. But it got to the point where, in the beginning, yes, we were barely eking by. And so it was true. I needed to work really hard. But once we got to a place where, we had some wiggle room in our budget, I continued to act as if we were back in that place of, barely eking by. And so I would just say yes to every single thing because I was scared. And so it was my lack of trusting in the Lord and really relying upon him and really recognizing that he would be faithful. And I do the best that I can do and give him what I have, and then trust him to multiply that to be enough. And so recognizing that it didn't all depend upon me, but I spent so many years feeling like it did, like I was the one that had to make the things happen or it wasn't going to happen, instead of realizing that God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. He is, he's the one that has given us everything that we have. And so why can't I trust him? And so I guess that's a very big picture answer to that question. But I think to just encourage women, where is your trust? And where are you finding your affirmation from? And if you start from the place of knowing that God owns everything and he is fully able to supply all your needs, and then also understanding how much you're loved by him, then you can have this business, do this entrepreneurial thing out of that space. And I think it's going to bring you so much more joy, and you're going to have so much more peace in the process than if you're feeling like you got to white knuckle your way through and work as hard as you possibly can and hustle, because if you don't, then it's not going to be successful. And there's a lot of people that will say that, but the truth is, ultimately, I can tell you story after story after story where, especially like 2020, where I didn't work very hard at all. And it was the best year of our business. And it was kind of for me recognizing, oh, okay, so God can bless it without me doing crazy work hours. It was just that realization of that. And it was just, to this day, I just see him. There's so often where something will just take off, or someone will mention it, or it'll, there'll be some big opportunity door that opens that I didn't kick open myself. I didn't make happen. And you just have to know that was God. And so he is fully capable. I think, yes, we work hard, put faith to our faith, but also ultimately know that he's the one that's in control. And so resting in that allows us to be able to shut it down and turn it off and focus on our kids and compartmentalize, because otherwise it's never going to be enough. And we're always going to be chasing after more.
Oh, I love that. That's so good. I feel like the word that kept coming up when you're saying that too is like identity. Like, where's our identity? Because that's where that comes from. Like, if we're trusting in the Lord, and we don't need our accolades from other people because our identity is so rooted in him. I love that. Thank you. All right. Well, Crystal, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today and share about your book, and talking about your book really quick too. It's on Amazon. It's at Baker Publishing is who published it, correct? Are those kind of, and pretty much any major retailer, right? Like Target has it, I think now, right? Walmart.
Yes.
So, okay. Do you have anything else to that you would want to share about this before we close up about your book?
Yes. Well, the best price right now is on Baker Bookhouse. So they continue to beat out Amazon's pricing. So, if you're looking for a deal, which I always like people to be able to get a deal. Also, most libraries have it. So if you're saying, I don't know if it's for me or I can't afford it, I always encourage people, go see if your library has it, or if it's on Hoopla or Libby, if your library uses those, or go ask your library to carry it. I love it when people do that, because then that allows more people to be able to get access to the book and to be able to read the book. But one of my heartbeats for the book was to really make it doable and actionable and accessible. And so at the back of the book, there are a lot of resources, but there's also a 7-week plan to walk you through the principles in the book and to really help you so that it's kind of baby stepping your way through. And so if you're feeling overwhelmed, it's not like, here's a book, you read it and you got to do all the things, but it's, here's a 7-week plan, and you can make it 70 weeks if you need to, like I say on some of the weeks, if you're ready to move on, you can move on. If not, stay here, because I'd rather that you have some microscopic forward momentum and stick with it than that you try to overhaul your life overnight and you crash and burn.
So true. Oh my word. That spoken from someone who truly knows how to do this, right? Like you just said, so many books, like just here it is. But the actual here's step-by-step application. So great. I love that. Yeah, I'm on my second round through this, and I'm picking up, and I would recommend that too, guys. Read it more than once if you can, because it's so great. And I think most libraries have it. I live in a really, really small town, and my library has it. I didn't even have to request it, because I went to go request it. And it's it's already there. So most libraries have it now. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Crystal, for your time and for just your heart for the Lord, and to really just encourage other moms and women and just people. But I know that you primarily focus on moms, to just really love the Lord and use their time wisely and use their finances wisely as just our stewards of him. And I just love that you're such a light on the internet. I'm so grateful for you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity to have this conversation.
Thanks. All right.